Okay. So, as I said, I hope that you had a chance to read the introduction we sent out. And we chose the title Courage in Chaos for this volume because chaos is exactly what St. Francis de Sales was experiencing during his life and ministry. I don't think that any of us can really understand the upheaval in Western Europe that was created by the Protestant Reformation. The church had been in crisis already, don't get me wrong. It wasn't like it was this perfect place that people were leaving. Indulgences were being sold. Priests were essentially holding people's salvation for ransom. Bishops were acquiring wealth and disporting themselves. And it wasn't a church that was particularly reflective of the gospel. And it did indeed need reformation. And that did indeed happen with the Counter-Reformation. But it really should come as no surprise when people of faith stood up and said that this was shameful. But none of that made it easy. The Reformation literally tore families and communities apart. Times were violent, they were confused, they were chaotic, and it was during that time that Francis de Sales became first a priest and then a bishop, a leader of people who were both afraid and in crisis. And I think that it's really important to place him squarely at this point in history, because if there was a person who lived through chaos and has something to teach us about doing the same, it was him. And yet, what I love is that for all the violence and divisions and strife of his time, his voice is incredibly gentle. He's kind, he's encouraging. And as I said earlier, that he is definitely a saint for our times, because our own world is also filled with divisions and violence and fear. Salesian spirituality, the spirituality that's come from St. Francis de Sales and from St. Jean de Chantal, is very practical. It's an everyday spirituality. It's a spirituality for living in the modern world. It's a way to journey in a spiritual life in which people embrace where they are and who they are, where you can find holiness wherever you live, whatever your state of life. And I think that's important too, because, you know, we talk a lot about the kinds of spirituality that certain saints advocated and followed, and it really is for people who have a religious vocation or for people who go into the priesthood. And this is a spirituality that's for the rest of us, in a sense. It doesn't matter what your state of life is. You can be part of the Salesian family. He's the one who coined the phrase, bloom where you're planted, which you've probably seen on posters all over the place. It's a way of making the everyday holy. You don't have to be a priest. You don't have to enter a religious order. You just need to live out your faith exactly where you are. And what that means to me is that in every way possible, St. Francis de Sales gives us courage in chaos. So over to you, Sister Catherine.
Okay, well, that was a wonderful beginning. In this first section, let me just click here. In this first section that we looked at, I thought maybe we could take the word gentleness as our key word that we'll look at tonight. I think maybe in the original translation and the original language of Francis de Sales, he may have used meekness, but it has been translated gentleness. And I think that has a beautiful softness and yet strength to it. And interestingly enough, he says, to live in a gentle way, it is important to respect ourselves and to never grow irritated with ourselves. So we're going to look at a few key quotes and kind of break them open. These quotes are from that first section of the book. So St. Francis de Sales is showing us a gentle way. So he says to live in a gentle way, it is important to respect ourselves. And perhaps when we think of meekness and gentleness, we might actually think of the other person. We have to be gentle with someone else. We have to be meek before someone else. But Francis de Sales says something very different. He says, to live in a gentle way, it is important to respect ourselves and to not grow irritated with ourselves or our imperfections. It's interesting that Francis de Sales really preferred virtues that were common and ordinary, and not the virtues that we live on rare occasions. So we have to be patient with ourselves. I don't know about you, but I need to be patient every day. And almost every day I get irritated by something. And so it's just kind of a rhetorical question. Have you ever gotten angry? Ever felt irritated? And when you do, if you can remember, like maybe the last time or some very strong time of impatience or frustration, what did you feel like inside? You know, what was that experience like? I know I feel kind of closed. I feel hard. And then how do you feel about yourself? What do you think about yourself? It's important as we look at Francis de Sales, especially, I think, to really go inside of our own selves and get in touch with what he's talking about and the beautiful healing he's offering to us. So he says, although it is reasonable that we should be displeased and grieved with ourselves, he says we need to guard against being bitter or angry or fretful about our faults. The interesting thing is that, you know, our faults can arise from so many sources. You know, I have temporal lobe epilepsy, so I have a hard time mentally trying to pull together everything that's happening and all the various elements of the work I'm doing and keep it all straight. And I can feel very irritated sometimes. And that's not a sin. It's not even a fault, but it's something I and everybody around me has to live with. And I have to be gentle with myself and respect myself in that place. Other times I can get angry because I think I am right and everybody else is wrong in this respect or whatever. That's a different situation where I have to look at myself and where is that coming from? And also to respect myself, to be patient with my faults. And he's going to show us what to do with our faults very shortly. He says, many people fall into an error and they get angry because they have been angry, or they get impatient because they have given way to impatience. I don't know about you. I was always told, you know, sister, you're getting angry because you've been angry. And when you do that, when you get impatient because you've been impatient, it's almost like a cat chasing its tail. It goes around and around and around and around, and it never stops. And it creates, as he says, a chronic state of irritation. And the problem with that is in the next phrase. When we have a chronic state, because we keep on remembering something and getting upset at ourselves about something that we've done or fallen in or whatever, it strengthens it and makes it stronger. It strengthens our own impressions of self-hate or frustration at others or belief that God doesn't love us. All these impressions that kind of unconsciously get put on us become stronger and stronger and stronger. And then it becomes easier to fall again and again and again. So what Francis de Sales is doing, is showing us a way out of this problem. So the first thing he says is very practical. He says, lift up your heart quietly. So we're all going to fall. Why are we going to fall? Because we're daughters of Adam and Eve, sons and daughters of Adam and Eve. We all carry within us the flu or pneumonia of original sin. We are weak and we are frail. We carry within us physical illnesses and headaches, and we're carrying many times problems and worries and difficulties and loves that are broken and difficult. And all of this makes it really easy to fall. And so he says, lift up your heart quietly. Humble yourself deeply before God without being surprised that you fell. Simply regret that you should have offended God and begin to seek God's grace anew. And this last little part of the phrase here, I think is really important. Have on one hand a deep trust in God and his mercy, but on the other have a bold and brave heart, so that you pick yourself up and you keep going. You hold in both hands God's mercy and a bold and brave heart that keeps going in the face of that mercy. Now we can say, well, St. Francis de Sales can write this because he lived a gloriously holy life. And with all the realities that Jeanette informed us of, he probably was on the great heights of sanctity and was not bothered by any of it. But in reality, when we look at his life, he was brutally attacked verbally and physically for his beliefs and what he did as a bishop. He was waylaid by assassins. He spent one night hiding out in a tree, afraid for his life. And he was physically attacked by an entire hostile crowd on at least one occasion, who insulted and physically beat him. So here's a man talking to us about meekness and gentleness, who lived through our own realities and who had a big problem with anger much of his life. It's something that he had to deal with a lot for years, 20 years, until he was able to become and be this meek person that we know as Francis de Sales. So, the gentle way, he says, no one ever loses by being generous, noble-hearted, and courteous. I found a little story I'll share with you. And the story goes like this. One evening, St. Francis de Sales was talking at length with the Marquis about some very important affairs. When they finished, it was very dark. But the servants, each thinking that the other one had taken care of giving him a candle, left him without any light and no candle. So when the Marquis was ready to leave, the bishop, Francis de Sales, had to take him like a child by the hand and lead him through the gallery and down the hall in pitch black to the outside door. And there he found his own servants entertaining themselves with those of the Marquis. And when retiring, the saint simply said to the butler, "My friend, with a 2-cent candle, we would have done ourselves honor this evening." My friend, with a 2-cent candle, we, not you, we would have done ourselves honor this evening. So he says, be sure, going back to the screen, to examine your dealings with your neighbor often and see if your heart is just toward him, as you would have his heart just toward you were things reversed. And this is the true test of reason. There's another little thing I read in a book that I think is also a very practical thing. You know, when tempers are flaring and things are getting hot under the collar, it takes one person to say simply, "I'll take responsibility for that." And it just cools down, because everybody wants someone to take responsibility for what just happened. maybe it wasn't your responsibility. But saying, I'll take the responsibility for that, removes everybody's like angst so that together you're able to get on with resolving the situation at hand. And I thought that was a very St. Francis de Sales like approach. When we're looking at gentleness and meekness, we can also work with gentleness, or we can work with restlessness and haste and hurry. And so he says, therefore be careful and diligent in all your affairs. God, who entrusts them to you, wants you to give them your best effort, but try not to be too anxious or solicitous. Do not go about your work with restlessness and excitement, and do not give way to bustle and eagerness in what you do. Any form of excitement affects judgment and reason and hinders a competent performance of the very task which is making us anxious. This, I believe, points to a really important point, that meekness or gentleness really is a part of the virtue of temperance. So gentleness is not, like hiding away like a wallflower, or letting everybody run over you, or trying to be fairy-like or whatever. It's a very strong virtue that's able to hold many things together. So in places of work, or in our situations of work, even in our home, we have to hold a meekness and a strength and a responsibility and the ability to handle multiple things coming at us, all with a spirit of temperance. So meekness is kind of balanced with many other virtues, which makes gentleness or meekness very strong. When we look at this little paragraph here, it's when I want things my way, or I'm afraid, or I'm running out of time, or many different other things that are natural within us that end up pushing us into a state of anxiety, or restlessness, or excitement and bustle about what we're doing. And when we're overly excited, our reason does get a bit clouded. And so he's saying, like, if we don't work with restlessness, we can actually see things more clearly. I was reading a book the other day, and it was saying, by Chenu, a theologian, and he said, it's when we need to get a whole bunch of things done right away. Like, that's the definition of activism. And I know when I get in that mode, I can be kind of violent to anything in my way, or whatever. But he said, when we work out of charity, when we work out of love, I'm wanting to, the full flower of the virtue of charity, we still can be doing lots of things. And we still can be in a hurry sometimes because we need to get things done on time, or, a doctor needs to finish the operation or the person will die, whatever it is. But it's coming from a different space. It's coming from that place of love. And so I think Francis de Sales is saying, so like, calm down and look at where everything inside of you is arising. The gentle way, he says, be careful then that you keep this mystic chrism of gentleness and humility in your heart. For it is a strategy of the enemy to make people content with the superficial show of these graces, while they fail to examine their own inner hearts. After we finish this part of the presentation, we'll be going through a way of praying where we can really, in a very profound way, allow Jesus himself to show us things within our own hearts, resistances that we can let go of, that we can allow him to gently massage in a way and open up, so that the meekness and the gentleness that is inherent in us can then actually begin to flow like perfume and fragrance or oil, something very beautiful into the world. And because we don't want, I don't know about you, but I've been like, oh, I'm very meek. I understand. Thank you, sister. You know, okay, I'll do that. It's like Francis de Sales is saying, we're talking about mystic chrism. It's almost like a baptismal phrase, like from the inside out, to find that space of God where humility rises like perfume over everything. And then the outside actions flow from that. They're not like this lid you're putting on a cauldron of boiling water inside. And so he says, to follow that, he says, be filled with gentleness. So how do you be filled with all of your heart and soul with gentleness? And I think this is so practical and so helpful. He says, take those times when you're not upset, when nothing crazy is going on. You're peacefully looking at the mountains or the sea or the street or whatever, your little grandchildren or whatever it is. At those moments, gather up a store of meekness and kindness. I believe Francis de Sales, he loved the image of the bee. And others will know more than I do. But the image of the bee going around to honey, to the flowers, to gather honey. So it's at times when we're not anxious and things aren't crazy, and people aren't bothering us and we're not feeling irritated. We need to gather up those good times and like store up a spirit of meekness and kindness, so that we have it in store for the difficult times, so that in those easy times we practice speaking and acting gently. This has nothing to do with Francis de Sales, but I remember 40 years ago seeing a documentary on Tibet. And the monks, the little the boys who enter the monastery there, like at 10 years old, they are not taught how to pray until they learn how to close a door silently and gently. And I've always, not that I close doors gently silently, but every time I don't, I think of and I think Francis Sales is onto the same thing, that our actions, even something like closing a door, can be done gently. And that has an effect in our entire being. So we not only speak gently to our neighbor, but we want to be filled with gentleness. And we must not merely seek the sweetness of honey in courtesy and kindness with strangers, but also the sweetness of milk with our own family. And we all know that sometimes it's our own family that drives us crazy. And it's the hardest to get along with because they're the closest. They're the ones we love the most. They're the ones that hurt us the most. And so it's allowing that gentleness to knead itself into us, even in our relations with family and neighbors, because they always tell us in the convent, we don't want to be angels on the people on the outside and devils in the convent to our own sisters. We need to practice at home that beautiful spirit of gentleness. So I invite you to place yourself in the presence of the Lord. Just in this evening, relax, to take a big breath and let it out. Let the peace around us almost soak within us.
to let out our breath like the waves of the ocean just flowing out, 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 leaving us empty, quiet. And now pay attention as you look back over the day to how the Lord may have been present to you today. Where have you met the Lord in something you read, in a song, something someone said to you, in an inspiration after communion, in a silent thought? And offer a small prayer of gratitude. And as we move into our meditation, I invite you to choose one incident or reaction, a situation that stands out for you, particularly as we meditate with St. Francis de Sales on gentleness. Something that's not quite settled for you. And recall to mind the details of that incident. Almost feel yourself back into it. What was happening? Who was there? How did you react? What were you feeling, even physically? How were you reacting to what was happening? And just notice what that is like. And we're going to bring that experience, whatever it is, into contact with the Word, with Jesus, and with His saving and healing Word. I'm going to read the story of the lost sheep. By this time, a lot of men and women of doubtful reputation were hanging around Jesus, listening intently. The Pharisees and religion scholars were not pleased, not at all pleased. They growled, "He takes in sinners and eats meals with them, treating them like old friends." And so their grumbling triggered this story. Suppose one of you had 100 sheep and lost one. Wouldn't you leave the 99 in the wilderness and go after the lost one until you found it? And when found, you can be sure you would put it across your shoulders, rejoicing. And when you got home, call in your friends and neighbors, saying, "Celebrate with me, I found my lost sheep." You can count on it. There's more joy in heaven over one sinner's rescued life than over 99 good people in no need of rescue. The parable of the Good Shepherd and the lost sheep is familiar to us all, and it's easy to picture the different characters in this story. When we listen to the voices in this translation, it says they growled. And that's a wonderful word because it gives us a sense of of everything in them that led them to say to Jesus, he takes in sinners and eats meals with them, treating them like old friends. So there's an attitude, there's this closed feeling, almost, the words are almost violent without striking out. There's a sense of hardness, of harshness, of exclusion. Then there's the sheep who was frightened, or perhaps this sheep was independent and wanted to strike out on his own. Maybe the sheep just had its own little agenda. Or maybe the sheep wasn't too bright at all and just got lost from the herd. But the sheep plays also a central role in the parable. And then there's Jesus, who goes through a lot to find the sheep. I read somewhere, looking at the Middle East shepherds, they could leave their sheep for almost a week and go out in search of a lost sheep. I doubt they could carry a week's food with them. And if they were actually found the sheep after 7 days, that's another week to go back. So Jesus went through a lot to find this sheep. He wasn't walking down Main Street. He was walking through the desert, up and down mountains, under trees, over rocks. The shepherd goes through a lot to find a sheep. And then he carries it home. He doesn't use his stick and prod it forward. And in these beautiful pictures, such as this one from the West, it's always a nice, dainty little sheep. However, if you look at images from the East, even in the catacombs, it's not a dainty little sheep. It's a big sheep, because sheep are big and heavy and smelly. And he put the sheep on his shoulders and he carried it home. He walked another 4 or 5 days with that sheep on his shoulder through the desert, over the mountains and hills and the crags, and bringing that sheep back to its home. And then he rejoiced over it. Wasn't growling like the Pharisees. He rejoiced. And he treated that sheep in a way that it would trust him enough to stay. When we look at our life, runaway things can trigger anger. Anything that runs away can trigger anger. It could be a situation. It could be our family spinning out of control because of something that one member does. It could be our finances running away. Anything that runs away, any runaway thing, can trigger anger in us. And this can be because it's unexpected. It creates an unexpected disturbance in our plans. And runaway things can endanger us and endanger others. They're inconvenient and they're scary. And so it's natural that we might feel angry, we might feel frustrated, we might feel irritated, we might feel discouraged or depressed. The Good Shepherd was inconvenienced big time. He felt responsible for that sheep. He didn't know if he'd find the sheep when he went out looking for it. He didn't know what was going to happen to the other sheep in the end that he left behind. Perhaps he ran out of food looking for the sheep. Perhaps he couldn't sleep. And in the end, the Good Shepherd, any shepherd, has to admit, we all have to admit in the end, he had no control over whether he'd even find the sheep or whether the sheep would want to come back with him, or whether if after all that effort, the sheep would run away again. And I think, an interesting question to even ask ourselves, are we able to control the things that make us angry or irritated or frustrated or depressed? Can we even control them? Going back to the situation that you brought into this meditation, I invite you to put yourself back there in that moment, right in that moment, with all of its feelings and what was happening and who was there and what was going on inside of you. And I invite you to see Jesus, the Good Shepherd, walking into that situation. Maybe someone else has run away in that situation. Maybe you have. Or maybe the whole herd is in chaos and you'll all be running away. But allow Jesus to walk into it and just watch him. Watch as he looks at or interacts with or engages with each person in that situation. When his eyes look at you, what are they saying? And almost allow Jesus to come inside of you so that his eyes are looking out through your eyes. His ears are listening through your ears. His heart is beating inside your heart. And he's almost a teacher, a mentor, so that as you look at the situation, you allow Jesus' eyes to teach your eyes how to see in that situation, how to see other people, how to see what's happening, how to see whatever it is that's, quote, running away. And allow his ears inside of your ears to hear whatever is happening, to teach your ears how to hear another's voice, how to hear the unsaid things that are beneath what is actually being said. Allow his heart to teach your heart how to touch what's really happening. How almost to touch the heart of God in this situation. The other day, as this is a simple and almost silly thing, and a lot of times the senior sisters will come in the early morning and they'll roll down the aisle with their walkers. And, sometimes the noise can irritate you when you're trying to pray, the distraction. And that morning, for some reason, I just had a little irritated sense. And immediately I just took it away. And for a moment, God gave me this great grace to almost touch his heart and to touch how utterly delighted God is that that sister's rolling down that aisle to see him. How utterly joyful he is that that person is there. And that's really the heart of God. And that little thing was such a grace for me. And in these little and large ways, Jesus is our master. He touches us. And in such a simple way, and in just a second, he can change our way of seeing and hearing and loving forever. Because once we've seen, we know. We just have to keep coming back to that grace. Be aware of any inner resistance you may feel as we reflect on Jesus' gentleness, and just talk to him about it. Allow the Good Shepherd to show you the rewards of his gentle way of looking out for others. There's a certain cost that came with the grumbling of the leaders and the Pharisees. There was a cost in relationships, in their personal identity, in their own joy, their own relationship with God. And on the other side of the coin, there is a certain reward, a personal reward that comes to us. And Jesus can help us see the beauty of what can unfold within us when we also pick up the lost sheep and put it on our shoulders. What would it be like to take on this gentleness of Jesus? The Lord is right here, moving your heart toward gentleness. And allow yourself to experience that. Spend some time talking over with the Lord what you are experiencing, where you're feeling moved. And with a gentle simplicity, express your sorrow for any lack of gentleness that may exist in your life in some place or another, with some person, in a specific situation. And as St. Francis says, with a bold and brave heart, identify just one step, one thing you feel you can do to become a more gentle person. It needs to be something that you can do. It's possible. It's not very hard. It's something you can almost fall into. As you remember Jesus within you, looking and listening and loving. You can say to yourself, I see myself as, envision yourself as, and just ask Jesus to help you. Jesus, we ask you for the grace to be a more gentle person. Amen.